Hey, this is Little Miss Higgins, and you're listening to the Northern Report with Sean Burns.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. Welcome to the Northern Report. I'm your host, Sean Burns, and I'm coming right at you from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Here on the Northern Report, I aim to shine a light on emerging and existing Canadian talent, as well as some of the legends we're still lucky to have with us. My guest on today's show is Little Miss Higgins. Jolene and I are old pals. We landed here in Manitoba around the same time back in 2013. In 2015, I joined her band, holding down the upright bass chair for 3 years. We saw a lot of stages and did a ton of miles together, and I learned a whole lot from Jolene, her Little Miss Higgins character, and the stage show that came with it. As you're about to hear, we got caught up, we shared some laughs, and dug into her history. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with my friend Jolene, aka Little Miss Higgins. Hey, pal.
Hi, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I was like, oh no, she knows I'm going to be interrogating her for the next hour.
I'm like, wow. Okay, why isn't he phoning? You're just like, and then I opened my phone and I'm like, oh, he did phone.
I'm nothing if not punctual, you know? Yeah. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Not bad. I'm, trying to find ways to like keep busy and maybe forget about what's really going on.
I know.
Well, I've been doing some research, and like I knew a lot of this stuff about you, of course, already, but there's definitely a bunch of things that I want to pepper you about today and
sure.
Get the backstory. And like just like you said, it's been, you put out 6 records over the course of 12 years, and then now it's been 4 years. So
Did
it's
I?
like, yeah. Okay, so for the folks who may not already be familiar with you and your music, let's give them just a little backstory. You are originally from Alberta, and you spent time living in the great state of Kansas before returning to Canada. Mm-hmm. What do you remember most about your time down there, and how different was the culture and the community versus back home in Brooks, Alberta?
Well, I think in Kansas, the prairies are, there's a similarity, I think, with prairie people in the middle of the continent, but certainly down in the States, we were in the southeast corner of Kansas, actually quite near the Ozarks in like Arkansas and Missouri, which was pretty cool. Like I'll kind of direct it towards, the music side of things, because growing up, there was a lot of, through the 80s in Kansas, my folks listened to a lot of country music. So there was all that 80s country music going on. Plus we were near the Ozarks, where a lot of those big names kind of toured through the Ozarks, and actually some came through Independence, where we lived. There was a scene. There was like big theater where people played, and like outdoor concerts, and yeah, it was cool. Like I don't remember a lot of them, but my folks always talked about seeing different artists and going into the Ozarks and seeing them, and and then like the radio was always on with the good old 80s country of like Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton and Randy Travis and Vince Gill and all those, great songwriters from Nashville. And like, so that was like kind of my first sort of, whatever you want to call that as a child, when you're surrounded by this music because your parents listen to it.
That's the first music you remember hearing is the like country radio of the era.
Yeah.
Were you like? Yeah. Are you the only one in the family that was musical or creative type?
my older brothers, I have two older brothers, and they both played like in school. They played, Tyler, the older one, played trumpet, and Rylan played saxophone. But then after a certain amount of time, they both stopped playing those instruments. But they're both creative in other ways as well. And then my dad played music when he was younger. He played drums and guitar and trumpet. He was in the Air Force. He played trumpet in the Air Force. But when I knew my dad, he didn't play music. So he had also kind of, yeah.
Was guitar your first
but
instrument?
He bought No, I was just going to say my dad bought a piano one night in a bar in Kansas, and came home and told my mom, like, fellas, I bought a piano last night. And she's like, why did you buy a piano? He said, because I didn't have one.
That's a great answer.
So he bought, and it was it was not just a regular like upright, it was a mini grand piano. And luckily we had a room that it would fit in our house when I was growing up. And so he told me it was mine. I think I was about 4. I barely remember. And so I knew how to write my name, and I carved my name in the side of this mini grand piano. And I got in trouble for sure. And then I had to start taking lessons because I had carved my name.
Because it was your piano. Yeah.
And so yeah, no, I started with piano, just like classical kind of stuff. And then kind of, I ventured into a little bit of the pop music of the time. Like, I think I had a Debbie Gibson song. I can't remember which song, but that name pops into my mind. And like I think I played Wind Beneath My Wings, and some of that kind of stuff. I ventured into that direction. But then when we moved to Canada, like when we moved back to Canada, the piano didn't come with us, and we did get a piano, like an upright, but I didn't continue with it. It kind of fell away, and it was, as a teenager, I was getting less, and spending a lot more time like hanging out with my friends and venturing into other like types of music, and so my dad bought a guitar, and kind of just a regular acoustic guitar. So I started playing around with that, and so yeah, I just kind of taught myself guitar, and that was easier to like take around and play with my friends. My good friend Adrian and I, we would sit and figure out old folk tunes and sing harmonies, and yeah, so that kind of was the direction I went instead of continuing with piano. And yeah.
When did you start singing?
Not till later, like when I was a teenager, like I would sing a little bit with the piano, but never in front of anyone else. I'm sure my parents may have heard from the other room, but I never sang in front of other people. And then, well, with my friend Adrian, she sang like in choirs and stuff, and was in theater. And so that's when I was about 15, 16. And when I met her, and we started hanging out and playing music together and singing, and I got involved in theater as well. And so that kind of opened up the world of like my voice and finding my voice through theater and music and singing harmonies with my friend, and giving me that confidence to like say, hey, I can do this. Yeah.
So, you're hearing the, commercial country radio through the 80s and stuff. When do you start becoming familiar with like the traditional blues and the old timey music that are such a big part of your sound?
That happened like later on, like when I was first kind of, like, as I said, that when I picked up a guitar and started venturing into the different kind of genres of music that were out there, because, you know, my friends were listening to all the popular stuff that was going on, and like all good stuff like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and the AC/DC and all whatnot. But I was kind of like, I love this stuff, but it was never something like, I never went out and bought those albums. I was like, and one day I was driving around in my little car, I had a little Acadian scooter, and I listened to this old radio station, and Joni Mitchell came on the radio, and I was like, who is this? And I need to hear more of this. And my friend Jeremy Price Jones, who was in the car with me, he was like, I think her name's Joni Mitchell, but I don't know what the name of that song is. And so I went out and bought like every single Joni Mitchell album I could find until I found that song. But within my search for that song, I discovered her and like her voice and her lyrics, her poetry, her guitar playing. And I was like, this artist is amazing. And then from her and learning about her, I ventured further back and like who influenced her and those people. And I was listening to CKUA radio in Alberta, and I heard a Billie Holiday song. Again, all kind of just all from the radio. And I heard Billie Holiday, and again, I was like, who is that? What is that voice that I'm hearing? Like, that's amazing. I'd never heard anything like it. And so I went out and I found a Billie Holiday album, and I was like blown away. And I had heard stuff like this in old movies, but I'd never had an album where I could sit and just listen to, 50 minutes of Billie Holiday singing all these amazing songs. So yeah, and then that just opened up again a whole other world of that music. And then I went to theater school after high school, and that gave me a lot of confidence for performing and the world of music in theater. But then I was always drawn to this old jazz and blues music. And after theater school, I ended up in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. And there was this amazing scene in Yellowknife when I lived there. And there was two clubs. There was this main bar, the Gallery, and then in the basement was the Cave Club. And there was more like kind of popular music and rock and roll happening in the Gallery. And then down below in the Cave Club, there'd be all these amazing like Canadian roots and blues musicians would come up, and they'd play for like a week or 2 weeks.
So just
and
touring,
they'd stay in the
like...
band house. Yeah, they'd come up, and it was amazing. Like Tim Williams and Ray Lemlin and Donald Ray Johnson and Big Dave McLean and like Grant Stovall came up and was like a house drummer for a while, and Graham Guest, keyboard player, piano player, came up, and he and I started dating. And that's kind of, I listened to this stuff and I was like, this is amazing. And he just opened up this world of like blues music. And so I was like 19, 20 years old, and I ended up moving to Edmonton. That's where Graham lived. And we like, he played with all these amazing like Canadian blues musicians, and so I got to spend a lot of time in these, blues clubs in Edmonton and Calgary and like the Yale and Vancouver, and experience these amazing artists like Big Dave McLean, like I said, and Stu Foley, and just so many. Sunny Rhodes. I can't even list all the people that I saw going to, especially the commercial hotel in Edmonton, Blues on White.
Yeah.
Like, just spending so much time listening and watching. And then on my own, like I wasn't really playing a lot out in public, but just absorbing everything, kind of my schooling, and going home and sitting down and figuring stuff out. And I was really interested in the older stuff, like even venturing farther back than the stuff that I was seeing in the clubs. And so I heard someone kind of said, hey, you should listen to Memphis Minnie, or you should listen to Big Bill Brunsey, or you should check out Jessie Mae Hemphill. And I'd be like, I'd be writing these names down, and I'd like go to the library and like find CDs.
That's so cool. That's like
out.
Such a lost thing, like you said, like you went to the record store and bought all the Joni records just to find the one song. And then, you go to the library and you're like really doing your homework in a way that I don't think, people starting out now have to, or would have the patience to do.
Right. Hey,
yeah.
I'm so dating myself. Like.
I caught the tail end of that still, like I still remember going and buying records to find the song, but I mean, it's more convenient now, but you're losing out on some of that experience.
Yeah. Well, and for me, it happened, in such a way that was like, having to do the detective work of like, how do I find a Jessie Mae Hemphill album, or like Lil Green, or So it was even finding them in the record stores was tough. Like sometimes I'd go to the library and there'd be a weird random album that I, kind of heard that name on the radio. So I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, this is cool.
But so you go to Red Deer College, right? For theater school?
I did. I went to Red Deer College, and I also went to the Canadian College of Performing Arts in Victoria.
Because like one thing that I definitely picked up and learned from standing beside you on stage is this really sort of strong and effective way that you're able to present yourself to the audience, like with your sort of like legs like dug into the stage and your shoulders spread, and you're like, like preaching to the people. Like, is that something that you learned doing theater?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Like I did not have that confidence as a kid at all. Like I was super shy. I didn't like to speak. I was very quiet. I spent a lot of time by myself as a kid, or like hanging out with my dad, driving around in the country. And like, I never would have dreamt that I would be a performer. But there was this little inkling, this little tiny spark that always kind of, or pilot light that was burning, I guess. And, it's funny. I brought this up recently in another interview, that watching the Muppet Show throughout the 80s, I think had a huge effect on wanting to be a performer or wanting to be an artist. Because I remember watching that show and like the variety show of it all and being like, this is so cool. Like I kind of want to do that. I kind of wanted to be a Muppet. Like,
yeah.
I wanted to be Janice, the guitar player in the Electric Mayhem. And like, I don't know what it was, but there was something so creative about it that I think there was this little thing that fed from the Muppet Show that fed the pilot light that then eventually like kicked me like into going into performing, because I watch it now with our son. And I'm like, this stuff is brilliant. The Muppet Show and all the movies are so brilliant and so artistic and creative and mind blowing. Like they were doing it all by hand, right? There was no computer graphics.
Yeah, everything was harder.
Yeah.
Everything was harder to do.
But better, right?
Of course, yeah. You bounced all around Western Canada. You lived up north. You lived in Edmonton. You're in Victoria, and then you end up settling in the SK in the beautiful province of Saskatchewan. Had you already assumed the character of Little Miss Higgins by then, or is Little Miss Higgins born out of your time in Saskatchewan?
No, it was born in Saskatchewan.
When did you start performing as Little Miss Higgins?
It was I think it was around 2003, 2002, 2003. I ended up in Saskatchewan. I was doing a play and with some friends and fellow actors out of Victoria. We brought the show to Regina, and then the show was over and I had no other prospects. And so I kept the set and my suitcase in the back of my truck. And I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now. So I just stayed in Saskatchewan, and then some people let me like house sit for them for a while. And then I was like, I kind of like it here. So I stayed, and I was able to get an apartment for like $300 a month and work part-time in a coffee shop and then work on music. And so I started doing like open stages and doing a few shows. And I met this man, Xenophon Garkaditis. He's Greek. I can't pronounce his last name properly. I apologize, Xenophon. And so he and I met. He was a sound person at the time, and we met and hung out. And he called me Little Miss Higgins, and so I decided to use it on a poster for a show I was doing, and then it just stuck, and it kind of went from there.
So yeah. What's the first Little Miss Higgins proper show? Do you remember?
It was at the what's the name? Café Ultimate was this cafe where I worked, and I did a show there. My friend Michelle Boudreau, she was working there as well, and she was booking the shows. So yeah, she booked me, and I did a show. I don't remember if there was someone else on the bill or if it was just me. There's maybe 20 people there, and
you playing solo?
I played solo, yeah, and that was it. And then I just kept going, and I was working in this cafe, and again, watching lots of music, going to see Big Dave McLean play at the Plains Hotel, and then like Michelle Boudreau would book all these awesome touring acts that were touring across Canada. She'd get Chris Demeanor and Jeff Berner and Petunia. Saw Petunia play a couple times there, and yeah. So that was just, and some of the local festivals started to kind of hear about me, and so I booked a few festivals and a few other shows. I started another band. I was in a band called Kicking Up Dirt in the Throw-Togethers.
That's a good name.
And we had a show. Someone booked us for a show in Saskatoon, and we didn't really have a band name, so that's what I said. That's what came out of my mouth. And we did like 4 shows, and then we split up. My partner, who I played with for years in Saskatchewan, David Mark, also known as Foy Taylor, he was in that band. He played bass in that band, and then our drummer was the owner of the cafe. And I remember David was always like yelling at the drummer, be like, Brian, you're slowing down. Come on, open your eyes. And it was the demise of our band, unfortunately. And we had another guitar player, Robert Hook, in the band, and so the two of us played guitar and sang, and then David and Brian, and yeah, it didn't last long, but I knew David was a great musician, and so I asked him, I was like, hey, do you want to I know you play guitar as well. Do you want to I have this old country blues stuff that I've been listening to, Memphis Minnie, and do you want to learn some tunes and play a show with me? And so he said yes, and then we started dating, and yeah, and then we just kind of took off from there.
Yeah, that's the configuration that sort of gets you a little bit more well-known as the duo, and you become sort of synonymous as a Saskatchewan artist. And I guess you start getting these gigs and you need some product. And so you put out your first record in 2005, the Cobbler Shop Sessions, which is a really nice mix of what end up being some of the staples of your show even today, with the bluesy stuff and the folkier songs and a Dylan song, and some of my favorite songs of yours, like Ferry Boat Blues is on there. And we've never talked about this record, so I want to know how did all this come about, because it sounds really raw. But in a good way, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's recorded in an old building in a small town called Meacham, Saskatchewan, and we met these people that ran the studio, and we helped them. We to help pay for the recording, we helped them clean out the building and finish renovating it. And then we were able to spend some time recording in it. And so yeah, it was an old cobbler shop that was then a mechanic shop. And then eventually they bought it, and it was a studio. And they also owned the house next to it, so we were able to stay in the house next door. And so it was just one big open space, and then they had built the engineering room off of it, and so Lee Ward is the engineer on that, and so he recorded us, and we did it all live pretty much, if I remember correctly, and again live off the floor, and just placed each other in the room accordingly, because for some of the songs we brought up our drummer Melody Hawksford from Regina, and just had her placed kind of in one corner of the room, and we were in another corner, and then on two songs we've got Big Dave McLean. He was playing in Saskatoon, so we brought him out and played a couple songs, and yeah, again we just put him in another corner of the room, and yeah, just did it kind of, well, because of all the old records that I listened to, I said I want it to sound like this. I don't want it overproduced, and I don't think we really could have done a lot of, too much production. It was just kind of what we had, and so we went for it.
And then a couple years later, it's followed up with Junction City. That's nominated for a Juno and a Maple Blues Award. You win Outstanding Blues Recording at the Western Canadian Music Awards. Still a few really, really strong songs that you probably continue to play all the time. Trains Coming Down, Liar, Liar, Velvet Barley Bed. Did that album sort of change things for you? Did you feel like you'd kind of arrived on the scene in Canada after that record?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Things start to change.
Things start to change. And even before with Cobbler Shop, we were getting lots of shows. What I was doing was a little bit different. And, I was able to get bookings outside of Saskatchewan. I'm doing a few tours, like John Scholes hired me at times. And, just out of a pure whim. I didn't really have much to offer him at the time, but he's like, yeah, sure, come on and do a show. So we did. But then recording Junction City and getting the Juno nomination for it really helped. Not that I don't record music or make art to win awards, but it certainly helps do free promotion for you. So that was great. Lots of the festivals, perked their ears up after that as well. So that was cool. That was, yeah. And, you know, working with the other great artists that I, you know, love and respect, like Tim Williams. He produced and played on that album, Junction City, and had brought in some players for that from like local we recorded in Calgary, that album, and brought in some great local artists for that, and yeah.
And you got the live album in 2009, which appears to be the introduction of Jimmy James on the trumpet to your sound, right?
Yes.
That's Jimmy's first thing. And then you end up here in Winnipeg to make Across the Plains, which sort of seems to build on what you had going with Junction City and some more really strong songs that I love. So I guess some of them you probably don't play too often. Like I always like Wash These Blues Away and Beautiful Sun. But it also has your big hit on it.
Right.
Bargain Shop.
Yes.
Tell me about writing Bargain Shop Panties. And did you, when you were writing it or when you were done, did it occur to you like, oh shit, like I've got something here?
That song actually is like the bane of my existence.
You have to do it. Like I've seen it happen so many times. Like, okay, we got to do Panties now, I guess. But it's kind of a good problem.
Even writing it was like, you know, like this is ridiculous. I think I was in Watrous. I went for a massage and I was waiting in the waiting room, and I'd been to the Bargain Shop, and I was like, this is hilarious. I just was, you know, waiting. So I did some writing, and sometimes I don't know what to write. So I just write, you know, free form, whatever's going on. It's like, I went to the Bargain Shop and I bought some panties and I did and then I'm like, well, that's kind of funny, because there started to be a rhyming pattern, and so I'm like, oh, whatever, this could be a funny song. And I went home and I worked on it a bit, and then I played it for my partner at the time, and you know, he's like, yeah, it's pretty funny, you know, I like panties. And I'm just like, oh, okay, well, I'll try it out at a show. And I did, and people were like, woo, Bargain Shop panties. I'm just like, oh, okay, I guess we'll keep this one. And then it just got, you know, people just kept, you know, loving it. So I decided to go with it. I decided, okay, you know, I mean, I like the song. It's fun. It's like kind of playing off of an old Memphis Mini song, Bake My Biscuits, and like it's a little bit of, you know, reminiscent of that. But I write other stuff. I feel like I write, you know, there's deeper songs with more meaning and where I want to go as a you know, as things I want to say as an artist and a storyteller. But, you know, of course, people want to hear Bargain Shop Panties.
They want to hear the hit. They want to hear the hit. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, you can save it till late in the show. Give them the hit, you know. Hey there again, folks. As we approach the halfway point of today's episode, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Northern Report podcast. I'm your host, Sean Burns, and our guest today is little Miss Higgins. I'll remind you to follow along with the Northern Report podcast and playlist on Spotify. Subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts. Listen on YouTube, our anchor.fm page, or wherever you find your podcasts. Now, I did enough shows with little Miss Higgins to see how powerful a regional hit can be. Now, as her personal and professional relationships with Foy Taylor came to an end, Jolene enlisted the services of a stellar roots band from Winnipeg called the F-Holes. The Bison Ranch Recording Sessions earned little Miss Higgins her second Juno nomination, a well-deserved nod for certain. We'll dig in to the process of making that record with the band and the follow-up to it, My Home, My Heart. I guess so. You were touring pretty fairly steadily over the course of those few years with those records, and then at some point you end up hooking up with the F Holes, a Winnipeg roots band who kind of incorporate country and blues, rockabilly, Dixieland, and a little bit of the darker dash of like Tom Waits, and they really complement your sound well. Was it a conscious thing? Like I need to sort of have a band?
Yeah, I think even as I was playing as a duo with Foy Taylor and different configurations of the other musicians that I had been playing with, like I had Joey Lore on bass for a while. I always wanted to have a full band, and when I met Jimmy James and was like, he's like, I play trumpet. I'm like, why don't you bring your trumpet down tomorrow night and play with us? Even though I'd never heard him, I had no idea if he was any good.
Yeah.
But that's just who I am. I'm like, I just trust.
Come on
I was
down.
like, you know what? He looks like he can play really well. And he was wearing a little, 3-piece suit and his little pork pie hat and his little mustache. I'm like, okay, this guy. Yeah.
Even if you're shitty,
he'll look good anyway.
Yeah, you got the look. Yeah.
So, and then, learning about the F Holes and seeing them play, and I was like, oh, there would be such a perfect fit, instead of me trying to comprise a band. And so I asked if they wanted to do some shows, and they agreed. They liked what I was doing, and it was a good fit. It was a really good fit, and I, all of the guys were so easy to work with, and I would just present a song and they knew what to do. I hardly ever had to say anything.
Yeah, they're really musical guys, and they were really good at arranging with their own band. With the variety of instruments that they had, no one was stepping on each other's toes. Like they're pretty. And I still think that album like really, really holds up as one of the great, roots music records of the 2000s. Like, do you still feel really proud and that you accomplished what you set out to with that record?
With Bison Ranch?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I really do love that album, and I feel really, honored as an artist to have been able to create that with those musicians in the space where we recorded. And
yeah, can you kind of go into that a bit about like where you recorded it and how? Because that's a really good, interesting story as well.
Sure. So like the guys and I had toured a bit, and then I said, well, you guys, we should record an album if you're up for it, and they were. And so Patrick, I asked Patrick Alexander if he would co-produce with me, and he said yes. And so the two of us co-produced, and then we wrote some songs together with Eric as well, and Eric Lemoine. And so then, bringing those songs together and rehearsing them, and Patrick brought the idea to me. He's like, what if we record in my uncle's barn? I'm like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
And he's like, he runs a bison ranch, southeast of Winnipeg. And, he's got this really cool barn that we like party in, and in the loft, and there's a wood stove. And I'm like, okay, sure, let's do it. So we did. And he also suggested the recording engineer, Steve Laree, to come out from Alberta. And the two of them had been kind of talking about doing something. So I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so that was, set in place. And Patrick's parents, they live in the town near where the barn is, and they were away. They were like away for the winter, and so it was perfect. We had their house to stay in, and there was a hotel in town as well we used, and we set up and camped out and recorded. We set up the barn, like we rented or we borrowed or rented, I don't even remember, theater curtains.
Oh yeah.
Through Sam, because she works in theater. So we bought some theater curtains and set up kind of we divided the room in half and built these sound baffles. And so Steve set up on one side of the curtain and we were all on the other side of the curtain and had the wood stove going. And it was in April. We recorded in April, and it ended up being the coldest April in Manitoba's history, like recorded history. So there was snow on the roof, and as we heated the barn up, like snow would slide off the roof in the middle of a take, and it was like, oh shit. And you got to start that again. And we were doing everything live as well. We didn't. There was no tracks or tracking or anything. We did everything live off the floor. And so there's times you can hear crows or the train or bits of that, which we were fine with. The snow sliding off the roof.
Patrick's departure happens, I guess, in 2015. And full disclosure, I take over, and I'm on quite a bit of your 2017 record, My Home, My Heart. And there's some very, very nice moments on that one too. And it differs a bit. You've got some, you brought in Alex on piano on some, and Scott Nolan played on some. Big Dave again. Was it important for you to have that record sound like different than the Bison Ranch, or is it just sort of a natural progression?
I think just a natural progression. Again, as an artist, I tend to just, I think I'm always open to what needs to, what serves the music, what serves the moment, the time. My time with the F-Holes was sort of coming to an end in a way, like we were all finding other things, finding that going on the road wasn't gonna pay the bills, and so there other things going on in our lives that we couldn't be a full-on touring band, and so I was fine with that, and I was happy to have the time that I did have with them, and I still call on those guys when I can to perform, and so when recording My Home, My Heart, I think I knew I needed to do something, because I'd had a child, and time was progressing farther and farther away from my last album, and I was like, okay, I got to do something, and so I just made it happen. And Scott Nolan's studio had done some really great stuff. I really loved what was going on there. And I really liked Jamie Sitar, his work, and working with him. He's really great to work with. And so it just made sense. Sometimes you just have to take the easiest route rather than set up a live recording in a barn, because that was a lot of work.
Well, I really liked recording there, and I think Jamie and Scott really work well together, and I've since done a few things with Jamie, and he always offers an interesting perspective, and he's a musical guy as well, and he's not afraid to tell you when you can do better, and I thought that they both brought a lot to the table as far as that was concerned, but it was still like, you were still making the final decisions on the way things would go, but, taking their input. And I remember Scott, offering some suggestions about some singing stuff that we did. We were all singing around the same microphone and layering those. Like, I thought that was really good. I think I learned a lot doing that one as well. And I don't know where I was going with that. Oh yeah. It was the first record that you did and had made since you'd had a child. And that must have been a big adjustment as far as like writing and finding the time to write and finding the time to record. Can you talk about that a bit? Because I seem to recall you took off to Alberta for a couple of weeks to like write, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if anyone out there has birthed another human and or raised another human as from infancy onward, that it takes a lot of time and it's very difficult to, your focus is totally split. and so because I chose to stay home and not put our child into daycare, it was, it was a lot. It was a lot, because then it's like 24/7.
Yeah.
So because Eric was working at the time. He got a full-time job at the State of Boniface University, and so I was home a lot and home alone a lot with child, kind of out in the middle of nowhere too.
Yeah. So not a lot of time to sit down and sort of formulate some thoughts and write.
No.
Yeah.
So I asked my mom if she would help me out, and if I could. She wanted to be a grandma, for a couple of weeks and spend time with Joe, and then I could write. So I did. That's what happened. I went out there and we spent 2 weeks with grandma, and she got to spend lots of time with Joe, and I got time to write. And it was pretty funny though, because I'm sitting in my parents' basement again, like the piano was there, and with guitar, sitting in the basement when I was like, where I figured out how to play guitar, and it was a bit of an adjustment. I was kind of like, I'm sitting in my parents' basement writing music. Have I progressed, or am I regressing? But anyway, it worked, and I was able to get enough songs written, come back, and then record, and got most of the recording done. I think it was like 4.5 days we did in the studio, and got all those songs done, and yeah.
I mean, I guess Parenthood really sort of informed a number of the songs on there, and you came back with some strong songs, and we knocked them out over that weekend, I guess.
Yeah.
A couple big days for sure. So now it's been 4 years since then, and I know that you've been busy with writing and some other projects, and you had a previously unreleased song, No One Way to Live, included on We Still Got a Lot of Living to Do, the new compilation album from The Times Changed. I really like that one, and I think the band behind you there sounds great. Like, it's very complimentary. Can you tell me about that song, and if it's part of a bigger long-term vision or project?
Mm-hmm. That song is from a show that I'm working on called The Fire Waltz, and it is it's a big project that has been, it started as it's a family, comes from a family story of mine, and something I've always wanted to turn into something about my great grandmother, and she was born in France, but she grew up on an island just in the English Channel on Jersey Island. And when she was the oldest of 6 children, and she was married to a man named Francois, and then her family all left and moved to Canada, and so she was left with her husband and 2 children. And then he went to war, and she left and came to Canada with the 2 children. And so I was always just fascinated. There's so much like little bits into the story that I was always like, I love this story. It's so amazing. And we're still finding things out as we do little bits of research. And so I've taken that story, and I asked singer-songwriter Krista Meaner and artistic director of Ghost River Theatre, Eric Rose, to help me with this story. And so October of 2019, we spent 2 weeks together taking this story, and we wrote, I think Chris and I wrote 21 songs in 12 days,
wow.
Something like that. And then we performed them. And it was a song cycle that told the story of my great grandmother. And so then it was supposed to become a theater piece, but then the pandemic hit, and I was like, oh, now what are we going to do?
Yeah.
So I have this song cycle and wanting to take it a little bit further. So I've been doing a lot of like listening to audio material, like audiobooks, podcasts, and things. And so I said I could turn this into a podcast, like a mini series. So I presented the idea to Eric and Chris, and they said, yeah, let's do it. So I wrote a script to tie the songs together. And there's three main characters. There's my great grandmother, Eva, her first husband, Francois, and then there's a second husband in Alberta, Henry. And so we ended up hiring a third person. And so we're three characters. We are narrators as well as playing those three main characters. So we've got Matt Foster formerly of the Crooked Brothers as the third character, and then Chris Demeanor and myself. And so during the time, then last October 2020, we got together and recorded the music. We hired a group of musicians local out of Winnipeg, and set up here in St. Anne where we live, and we've got a little studio. So we set up here and recorded the music, and then started to record the script, but ran out of time. So we're still working on that. That's going to be happening this spring, with aiming to release the full miniseries in September of this year.
Will like No One Way to Live be part of a Little Miss Higgins album? Like, will you release it as a record as well?
So then we're going to, as well as the miniseries, we'll release the songs as an album. So it'll be the Fire Waltz album.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you're kind of unpacking and telling the whole story.
Mm-hmm. And so No One Way to Live is a song that came up like right before we started recording last fall. We discovered this other kind of mini story within the big story, which will hopefully lead to season 2 and season 3 of this big project. Because there's a lot of character development that's happening, and when Eva and Francois are still living on Jersey Island, they meet this troupe of artists that come from Paris, France, and one of them is a can-can dancer who wants to become a painter, but she's left the Paris and come with these kind of Renaissance artists to discover like more natural settings, and so they meet Francois and Eva, and the can-can dancer Geneviève sings this song at a party they're having called No One Way to Live, and it gives Eva some incentive to do what she needs to do in the story. And so that's sung from Geneviève's perspective, which will probably on the album be another voice than mine, but I wanted to record the song because I really love it. And so I recorded it for the Times Change collection with my voice and the band behind it. The band that we have, that we brought in, is Gilles Fournier on upright bass and Joanna Miller on drums. And on that song, I think we've got Eric Lemoyne on the banjo, and then Jimmy James on trumpet.
Okay, so that's obviously like a big undertaking and a big project, but you've also got My Heart is a Train, the podcast that you just released. And I listened to the first episode of that a couple of times. I think it's really well done, and I'm not going to give it away, but I do like the references, the inside references you included, like the Cobbler shop and the town of Watrous and the Senator Hotel. It's like a new and exciting outlet for you to tell this long form story. I guess, can you tell about the podcast series? Like, is this going to be My Heart is a Train separate from the Fire Waltz, and you're going to keep building on the episodes of this one?
I think with My Heart is a Train, the fire waltz kind of had to be put on halt for a number of reasons. Because it just became way too big to accomplish in the time that we had. So I decided I needed to do something. And so I took some old poetry that I had, prose, and I was like, I'm going to turn this into a story. Because I've been listening to a bunch of short stories. And I'm like, I can write a short story. So I did. And I looked at songs from Bison Ranch Recording Sessions, and I said, these fit with what I'm writing. And so I just did it, and I did it all myself to, keep costs low. And I hired a director, my friend Darla Bickham. She's an actor and a writer out of Hamilton, Ontario. And so we worked together to create this story, and using the music, it's what Darla described as a musical wander through a work of fiction. And I love it. I think that's what it is, and that's what it became. And so I finished it, and I finished that, and hired a marketing person Ella Haggis of Mystery Planet. She she did it all for me, the marketing and setting it up in the podcast world. And then it got to the end, and we were about to release it, and I was like, I think there's more to this story. Like I could finish writing it, because it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I think there's more. So yeah, I presented the idea to Darla. She's like, absolutely. And to Chris Demeanor, he's an executive producer as well. And he said, yeah, go for it. And so I'm writing that. I'm almost finished. And I'll have to record and create the second part of My Heart is a Train. That will be the end of it. It will end there. Just two parts.
Okay.
And and then I've actually been when I had to turn around when the pandemic hit, when I was on tour, got one show in at the Twin Butte General Store, and then we turned around and came home. Yeah. And came home. So, and then I had nothing for 10 months. I did a lot of writing, and not songs. I ventured more into story form writing, as I have wanted to do for a while. So I have a lot of that in kind of on the back burner, simmering. I've got more shows, as well as now finishing the Fire Waltz. Has
doing My Heart is a Train, like this sort of style of in the medium of the podcast, and that how is that? Is it an adjustment versus the live in person performing that you've done for so long now?
What I love and have wanted to do for quite a while, and have done a bit, throughout my music career, the theater, and always wanting to go back to theater and storytelling in a way. However, what the podcast does is makes it possible for me to do it at home, here, and in my studio.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I discovered. I'm like, I can do all this from my home studio, and I love it. And I want to do more. And so, I mean, I do love performing, of course. And, hope that will happen again in the future. But being able to tell stories in this way, I think, is going to be a big part of what I do in the future.
And the podcast is part of Dish Duty Dramas and Chicken Coop Comedies. It's a collective of independent artists creating innovative audio experiences. Can you tell us who else is involved, and if there might be some more podcasts from those folks up on there?
Mm-hmm. So the director for My Heart is a Train, Darla Bickham, and I were talking one night, and before we started working on My Heart is a Train, we were talking about, creating audio experiences, because we were stuck at home. Neither of us were working in our, live performance field. So, I said, I listen to a lot of audiobooks while I'm doing the dishes. And I feel like, they're cool, but I feel like there's an element of performance missing. Like, what if it was kind of like old radio play kind of ideas? And we were like, dish duty dramas. So that's where that kind of started. And then I brought up the idea to Chris Demeanor, because he's, as well as being a songwriter and working on the Fire Waltz with me and writing those songs, he's also an actor and a poet. And he has his own one-man show called Russell that I thought, well, that could easily be turned into a podcast, easily, like an audio show. And so I presented the idea to him, and he's like, yeah, dish duty dramas. And he threw out the term, chicken coop comedies, because Russell is a comedy. So I'm like, well, we got to fit both of them in. And so that's where that long title came from, is dish duty dramas and chicken coop comedies. And so I said, you guys, why don't we start this collective? It's a place where people can find cool, storytelling podcasts. They're not all necessarily fiction, storytelling in a sense of telling stories, whatever that means. And so Darla is working on some stuff that she has. She has a show called PANK, which is Professional Aunt No Kids, is what that's acronym for that. And she has a show that a one-woman show that she's working on turning into an audio experience, or she has lots of other storytelling shows as well. So they're working on their own shows, as well as trying to tell other artists about this, musicians, storytellers, and create a place for people to come and listen to stories.
Well, Bud, it's nice to catch up with you.
Likewise.
Hopefully talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Take care. Thanks.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed my chat with little Miss Higgins. Big thanks to Jolene for taking the time to talk with me. It was so great to catch up and have her share her story with us. Listen to Little Miss Higgins' albums and songs wherever you stream music for a nominal monthly fee, or check them out at littlemisshiggins.com. Follow along with the Northern Report Spotify playlist to hear music from the folks that I've covered in the Honky-Tonk Times column, as well as here on the podcast. Remember to subscribe, like, follow, and share the Northern Report, and thanks so much to all the folks who have been doing that so far. Our logo was created by Boots Graham of Boots in the Hoots, Central Alberta's finest honky-tonkers. Music on the show today courtesy of Sean Burns and Lost Country, The Divorcees, and Skinny Dick. From local legends to regional stars to the cream of the Canadian crop, you'll find it all here on the Northern Report. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We'll chat later. Hey, pal, what you got for us?
I'm in the garden, and it's as if the light of a new idea has streamed in and disturbed my ignorance.